Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of today, 30 years ago. Link makes his 16-bit debut, a technological virus is unleashed, and an arcade classic lands on the Sega Genesis. I'm your host, Jared, and today is April 15th, 1992. By far the biggest release of this week and month was easily The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, released April 13th, 1992. After the universal acclaim of the original and positive reception of Zelda 2, it was a hotly anticipated title for the Super Nintendo.
This time it calls you to the ultimate battle of good against evil. To a quest few are prepared for, and fewer still survive. But perhaps now the power is within your grasp. It's the game that's already a legend. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Only on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with superpower.
It quickly became one of the standout titles on the Super Nintendo, and my personal favorite of the Zelda games. The main selling point of Link to the Past was the Dark World mechanic. This was an entirely separate world map, complete with 7 additional dungeons compared to the 3 dungeons of the Light World. For the time, this was insane. I remember fighting Aghanim and feeling like it was the final boss, only to find out there's an entire second world to complete. This came as a surprise to anyone who bought the game, because even though it came with a world map, it only shows the Light World. So even at the time, we thought this was all there was. Unless, of course, you opened up the little Black Book of Top Secrets, which was sealed for all the hardest puzzles in the game. And if you open it up, right inside, it mentions the Dark World. So even in 92, we couldn't avoid spoilers.
There's a Dark World?
Did you know that Nintendo Power held a contest in 1990 that would grant the winner a cameo in an upcoming NES game? Note that I said NES and not Super NES. And that brings us to the Chris Houlihan room. To this day, there has been no official confirmation of who won the aforementioned contest and whether or not Chris Houlihan is even an actual person. The fact that his name was removed from the Game Boy Advance port of Link to the Past makes this all the more suspicious. Nonetheless, the room still exists. The official method of finding it involves performing very specific steps to manipulate the game's memory to teleport there. Well, good luck finding that without a guide. In fact, I'm pretty sure no one ever found the room until Nintendo Power themselves told everyone how to find it. And even then, I don't think I actually did it until, 2010? To this day, A Link to the Past is finally regarded as one of the defining games of the Zelda franchise, second only to Ocarina of Time. Many of the elements that we associate with the series, going into dungeons, getting an item to beat the dungeon's boss with, puzzles, a greater emphasis on story, all debuted here. It's been ported to the Game Boy Advance and made available for download anytime Nintendo had any kind of virtual console. It still has an active community thanks to speedrunners and all kinds of randomizers. I still personally remember the day that I got it, because it was the same time that we got a camcorder for Christmas that year. Naturally, my older brother took the camcorder and was just filming anything and everything he could, and he went upstairs into my room, and there I sat, looking into a little 12-inch CRT television. I was playing The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. In fact, I'm pretty sure in that footage, I still got 10 arrows. Leaving the past, we look forward to the future with Mutant Virus on the NES. The story goes like this. In the future, just about everything is dependent upon the CPI complex, an artificial intelligence responsible for just about everything technological. So when it gets infected by a computer virus, things get kinda nutty. Thus, our hero, Ronald W. Trainer, is shrunken down to face the virus head on. At the time, the game was fairly impressive for its cutscenes and visual effects. As for the gameplay, holy friggin' crap, this game is insane! It's like a turbo version of Asteroids combined with a presentation of Ninja Gaiden. And I never even knew this game existed until I researched it for this show. Seriously, did anyone have this game as a kid, or is this one of those late release anomalies? I'm sure it appears on some top 10 underrated NES games list somewhere. This was publisher American Softworks Corporation's first game they ever made, and it's impressive for how ambitious they went for it. Seriously, the SNES was already out for a few months, and the final few NES releases were typically all platformers. If nothing else, Mutant Virus stands as an interesting technical achievement for the NES, and it's worth checking out for that reason alone. Enough of that science stuff, let's take it to the streets. An iconic beat-em-up game came to the Sega Genesis, Double Dragon. Now I, and many others, fondly remember the NES version of the game. That's the same version that they showed off in the movie The Wizard.
What is he, some kind of freak or something?
It was single player, you leveled up, and the only two-player mode was a dumb versus mode. However, the Genesis version was not a port of that. It was an arcade-accurate conversion. It looked like the arcade version, it sounded like the arcade version, and most importantly, it played like the arcade version. Most home ports of Double Dragon lacked the ability to play co-op, one of the defining features of the arcade game. So when the Genesis version came out with co-op, it was a pretty big deal. At the time, this was the closest you could get to having the arcade version at home. This includes once you beat the final boss, having to fight the second player at the end. It was also a big deal that it came out for the Sega Genesis at all, a staggering 4 years after the NES version. Now in the 90s, Nintendo had a tyrannical possessiveness when it came to their exclusive games. They had a mandate that any third-party game could only be on a Nintendo console for a minimum of 2 years. Plus, by 1992, a little guy named Sonic the Hedgehog kind of helped things out. Hey, did you know that Double Dragon had a cartoon show?
Live the code of the dragon. Fight for right, the might of the dragon. With the mark of the dragon.
It sucked. Naturally, the biggest release this week was The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. As an installment to one of Nintendo's defining franchises, it sold like crazy. To this day, A Link to the Past is the 7th best-selling Super Nintendo game of all time at over 4.6 million units sold. Even with all these other games out this week, it's the biggest piece of the pie. Over in the collector's corner, Mutant Virus is still pretty obscure, so that cartridge alone still asks for a respectable $50, worth just as much as when it was first released. And Double Dragon on the Genesis still goes for around $30 for the cart today, which is 3 times as much as it is on the NES. As one of the Super Nintendo's most beloved games, it should also come as no surprise that Link to the Past is also one of its most coveted. Fortunately, with millions sold, they're not hard to find. However, a complete one, which includes the maps and the Tiny Secrets Only guide, makes it worth closer to $170. So if you got it all, you got yourself quite the collectible. And that's it for today. Next week, we got the Super Nintendo getting another beat 'em up with the most 90s box art you could possibly imagine, and the Sega Genesis gets a low-key anime game that rocked. I'm Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Be sure to click the like button, hit subscribe if you aren't already, and leave a comment down below, especially what your thoughts are on this new series. We're hoping to do this every single week, so we should be seeing you here every single Friday. In the meantime, I'll be right here looking at this Zelda map because I think it's neat.